Chief Justice John Roberts stepped into that hearing, certain he'd witnessed it all, until Representative Jasmine Crockett used his own remarks against him, leaving everyone in the chamber speechless. A quiet calm settled over room 201 of the Raeburn House office building, not the peaceful kind, but the stillness that arrives just before something sharp slices the air. On the surface, it was just another session, but everyone there could feel it. Something big was about to happen. Chief Justice John Roberts sat at the witness table in a dark blue suit that seemed to cost more than a month's earnings for most of the people in the room. He was poised, composed, and some might say overly self-assured. This wasn't his first time. He'd spoken before Congress numerous times and knew the way things worked. He would say just enough, manage the flow, and stay above the argument. This particular meeting, though, felt different. It wasn't about wide-ranging constitutional ideas. It was about something that made even the most experienced judges feel uneasy: judicial ethics. Public pressure had been building, with questions about fairness, gifts, and connections that were never fully revealed. People were watching, cameras were rolling, and this time, there was no protection of a judge's robe. The committee members took their turns. Some asked easy questions, while others tried to find a careful balance, not sounding too critical or too weak. Then, when it was finally her turn, there was a brief pause. A name was stated for the record: Representative Jasmine Crockett of Texas. She moved the microphone and leaned forward slightly. She didn't have to raise her voice. Her tone already demanded attention. "Thank you, Mr. Chairman." Some people in the room weren't paying close attention. They'd heard of her, of course. A former public lawyer, fairly new to Congress, known for being direct during floor debates and for speaking her mind. But this was a different setting, and she was sitting across from the country's highest judicial official. You could almost feel the silent bets being made around the room about how well she would do. Justice Roberts didn't react. He gave her the kind of smile that only powerful men learn to use, a mix of patience and show, as if he were answering a question from a smart student. But Crockett wasn't looking for approval. She was there to hold him responsible. "Chief Justice," she started, "you've stated in the past that the court follows a strict level of ethical behavior, even without an official code. Is that right?" Roberts joined his hands, his voice calm. "That is correct, Congresswoman. The court members follow principles that have long guided judicial actions." She nodded, turning a page in her folder. "So, help me understand, if that's the case, why was there no disclosure about the connection between Justice Merritt and a political donor whose case came before the court just last year?" That got people's attention. Cameras clicked, and a few heads in the room turned. Roberts didn't smile this time. He adjusted his tie slightly. "I am not able to comment on ongoing ethical reviews or specific matters related to individual justices." "Right," Crockett said, looking down briefly and then back up. "But you can talk about established examples, correct?" "Yes, good," she said. "Because from what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, the Supreme Court has historically used the appearance of impropriety as a guide. It's not just about whether something is technically wrong, it's about whether the public has reason to think something might be." Roberts shifted a little. "The standard of appearance has guided many institutions, yes." Crockett didn't wait. "Then wouldn't not disclosing a close connection with someone who financially gains from a court's decision seem improper?" She didn't shout or raise her voice. She didn't have to. The room was already quiet. Roberts was still composed, but the situation had changed. He answered carefully, "Congresswoman, I believe we're getting into made-up situations." "I am not. I'm quoting facts from your own court's financial records," she said. But the tension in the room hadn't reached its peak yet. That moment was still to come. Roberts sat up straighter in his chair, one hand resting on the polished table. His eyes, cool and practiced, scanned Crockett's expression, but she didn't flinch. Her gaze stayed firm, and her voice stayed steady. "I am quoting directly from the disclosure forms, Chief Justice," she said again, more slowly this time, as if daring him to question her source. He cleared his throat. "Those forms are put together by the court's office, and I trust the process is followed with care." "But do you look at them?" she asked, her head tilted slightly. "Do you personally make sure what's submitted is clear and honest?" The pause was short but revealing. "There is a system in place," he replied. "Each justice is responsible for their own disclosures." A Crockett leaned back in her chair. She didn't smile. This wasn't that kind of moment. Instead, she let the silence do the work for her. "Interesting," she said. "Because where I come from, if you're responsible for your own supervision, you're not being held accountable. You're just checking your own work." A few people in the audience exchanged glances. One staffer let out a quiet breath through their nose, half a laugh, half disbelief. Roberts tried to change the subject. "Respectfully, Congresswoman, the judiciary was created to function independently from the legislative and executive branches. Our job is to interpret the law, not to be controlled by political pressure. And no one here is trying to do that." Crockett replied, "We're not trying to tell you how to rule. We're trying to understand why certain patterns keep showing up and why they keep going unchecked." Roberts opened his mouth, but she held up a hand, not to interrupt, but to introduce her next question. "I spent years in criminal courtrooms across Texas, watching judges lecture young men, black, brown, white, it didn't matter, about taking responsibility, about how even the appearance of dishonesty could ruin their lives. So, forgive me if I don't believe that the nation's highest court can't be held to a similar standard." Roberts shifted his posture again, just slightly. "Congresswoman, I do understand your point, but we have always taken concerns seriously and responded with internal review and honesty." "You have no binding code," Crockett cut in, "and the only review comes from inside the group. That's like asking a fox to file a security report on the chicken coop." This time, there was a low murmur in the back of the room. Cameras clicked faster. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. She wasn't showing off, she was cornering him. Roberts breathed in through his nose, his fingers tightening on the edge of the table. He was still composed, but his answers now had the tone of someone who realized he was on thinner ice than he had expected. "The court is not above criticism," he said, "but I would remind the Congresswoman that respect between equal branches is crucial." Crockett looked down and then back up, the briefest hint of frustration on her face. Not because she was losing, but because she knew that word, respect, was being used to avoid the issue. "I respect the court," she said. "I respect what it should be, but respect without honesty is just for show. And the people who elected me, they didn't send me here to admire your robe. They sent me here to ask why the rules seem different depending on who wears the robe." Roberts looked at her for a longer time now. The change was subtle, but it was there. He wasn't looking at a new Congresswoman anymore. He was looking at someone who had come ready to break down every wall of technicality he tried to hide behind. But she was only warming up. The real strike was coming next, and this time, it wouldn't just be an idea. The next group of papers in Jasmine Crockett's folder didn't look like much. Thin, barely more than a few stapled pages. But they carried weight. Not the kind that made noise when dropped, but the kind that made people stop talking. She slid one page forward on the desk in front of her and moved the microphone. "Chief Justice, are you familiar with Dalton v. Mason County, decided in the Fifth Circuit in 2009? Roberts squinted for a second, not out of confusion but out of thought. Vaguely, that was a procedural ruling involving a judge stepping aside. "If I'm not mistaken." "You are mistaken," Crockett replied. "It involved a judge who failed to step aside, despite having hidden financial connections to one of the law firms in the case. The ruling made it clear that appearance alone was reason enough for removal." She tapped the edge of the page. "And yet, just last year, Justice Harlan took part in Macon versus Delta Rail, a case where his longtime friend and financial supporter stood to gain a lot from the ruling." Roberts didn't answer right away. Crockett leaned forward slightly. No stepping aside, no explanation, no transparency, and the decision came down 5-4. This wasn't just a criticism, it was a precise cut to the court's defense. Roberts breathed out slowly. "Congresswoman, I'm not here to debate individual cases. I'm not asking you to," she said. "I'm asking you how a court built on the principle of fairness expects the American people to have faith when its decisions seem more like secret agreements than fair judgments." A few people quietly gasped. One staffer's pen dropped onto the floor. Roberts leaned into the microphone. "Your language is inflammatory, and your silence," Crockett said calmly, "has been even worse." She didn't hurry. She let the importance of each phrase sink in before continuing. "There's a woman named Carla Jennings in my district, a single mother who worked nights at a hospital for 20 years. Her son was denied financial aid because of a paperwork mistake that made it look like she owed back taxes. She appealed all the way up to a federal court and was told in so many words, tough luck." She paused, looking directly at Roberts. "But a billionaire with private ties to a sitting justice can get their case heard," argued, and ruled on in less than 4 months, with good results. Roberts's eyes narrowed slightly, his hands now held together a little too tightly. He hadn't expected this kind of careful preparation, especially not from her. "The court," he said, "operates with limited resources and must make tough decisions about which cases it takes. That does not suggest favoritism, but perception matters, doesn't it?" she asked. He didn't answer. She asked again, "Chief Justice, does perception matter?" He nodded quietly. "Of course." Crockett's voice lowered. "Then I suggest you start caring a little more about what the people are seeing, because right now, they're not seeing justice. They're seeing power protecting itself." For the first time, Roberts didn't have a comeback. The room was silent. Even the committee chairman didn't step in. No one wanted to interrupt what was starting to feel like something historic. And Crockett, she wasn't even raising her voice. She flipped another page. "I came here today with respect, but I also came with facts. And the facts say your institution has a problem, a serious one, and it's time someone stopped pretending otherwise." But the true shift hadn't happened yet. Not until the Chief Justice realized who he was actually sitting across from. The subtle change in Chief Justice Roberts's voice wasn't missed by anyone. He leaned forward just slightly, joining his hands in a way that tried to regain control, but the rhythm of his words had changed. They were less steady, less sure. "Congresswoman," he began, "while I understand your strong feelings, I would be careful about making judgments from a few isolated events without a full understanding of the judicial process." Crockett didn't even blink. "With all due respect, Chief Justice, I'm not making judgments. I'm making connections. There's a difference." She could feel it the moment the balance started to shift. The eyes in the room weren't watching Roberts anymore. They were watching her. And that's when she made her next move. "In 2013, she said, holding up another document, "you gave a graduation speech at Harvard Law. You told graduates that, and I quote, 'Your credibility is your currency.' You said, the moment people stop believing in your honesty, everything else falls apart." Roberts leaned back. "That's correct. Then tell me," she said, her voice sharper now, "how does credibility survive when public trust in your institution is at its lowest in decades? When surveys show that more Americans believe the court is guided by politics than by principle?" He didn't answer right away. She pressed further. "You don't get to spend 20 years building a reputation and then act surprised when the silence around your colleagues starts cracking it open." Roberts opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett didn't wait this time. "You called this passion. It's not, it's precision. I'm not yelling. I'm not guessing. I'm asking why Americans like Carla Jennings are held to standards your justices can ignore in plain sight." She changed her tone, making it lower and more firm. "Do you know what it's like to walk into a courtroom knowing the scales are tilted before you even speak?" "I do. I've watched young men cry after being sentenced because they knew they never had a real chance. Because justice was never about truth. It was about who had access, who had connections, who had time." The silence in the room became heavy. No clicks, no whispers, just Crockett's voice carrying every word like a stone thrown through glass. Roberts tried to regain control. "The court has taken steps." She cut him off. "Not enough. Not when billionaires fly justices to private vacation spots and no one reacts. Not when you write decisions that affect millions from behind closed doors no one can enter." And then she said it. "You're right about one thing. Credibility is currency, and right now, your institution is in overdraft." That line hit harder than anything she had said all morning. One legal assistant in the back wrote it down so fast the pen almost tore through the page. For the first time, Roberts didn't have a response. He just sat still. Crockett let the silence last for 2 long beats before she leaned back in her chair, letting the importance of everything she had said hang in the air. She wasn't showing off. She wasn't performing. She was doing what no one else had dared, calling the court's power what it had become: protected, selective, untouchable. Roberts smoothed out his tie again, but the movement felt more like a nervous habit than a show of confidence. The committee chairman cleared his throat, ready to move on, but even he paused, maybe out of respect, maybe because he didn't know how to follow what had just happened. But Crockett wasn't done yet, not until the American people were a part of this conversation too. Crockett wasn't interested in just arguing with the Supreme Court justice. She came for something bigger, something personal to the people watching at home who didn't know the names of the cases, but felt the weight of their results every day. She took a breath and spoke in a different rhythm now, slower and steadier, less like a courtroom and more like a living room. There's a man in Odessa named George Salgado. He drives trucks, worked straight through the pandemic, didn't complain, didn't take a day off. But when his brother was held in a private immigration center and denied medical care, he filed a petition. The court denied it without even hearing the facts. She looked over at Roberts. I couldn't understand why, so I told him, because the law was written that way, and the system makes it hard to challenge unfairness when it's hidden behind language created to protect the powerful. She leaned in, and the highest court in this country had a chance to fix that, but you all refused to hear it. No explanation, no statement, nothing. Roberts didn't speak. Crockett continued, "These aren't made-up situations, Chief Justice. These are people who still believe in the law, even when it fails them. People who think if they work hard enough and follow the rules, someone at the top will care enough to listen to them." She turned to the room now, not just to Roberts, and we have to ask ourselves, what happens when those people stop believing?